Welcome to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Today, I'm thrilled to have Bill Hawkins on the show. Bill is a globally recognized leadership consultant and coach who has helped countless executives elevate their performance and productivity. With decades of experience and a reputation for delivering practical, no-nonsense strategies, Bill's insights are truly game-changing. In this episode, we'll help you identify your natural coaching style and explore ways to balance performance and development. Bill shares how leaders can adapt their approach to meet the needs of their teams as well. Plus, we'll tackle the challenges like coaching employees through burnout, avoiding common coaching mistakes, and differentiating between mentoring and coaching. So grab a notebook because this episode is brimming with actionable advice that you can start using today to foster greater engagement, growth, and long-term success. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Good Leadership Podcast, where we explore the stories, strategies, and insights of thought leaders who inspire us to think differently and lead better. Through candid conversations and expert perspectives, we dive into the challenges, breakthroughs, and practical lessons that shape exceptional leadership. Let's jump right in. And you've identified several natural coaching styles, including director, tutor, collaborator, and the casual styles. How can leaders determine which coaching style works best for them and their teams?
Usually when I begin working with somebody, one of the first things I'll ask them is, so what style do you really have in terms of coaching and communicating with your team? And the usual answer I get is, gee, I don't know. And what I'll say is, well, I've got a test you can take. But if I just go over it briefly, you're going to have a pretty good idea which is your preferred style. There are basically 4 different styles, and most of us gravitate strongly toward 1 or 2 of them. And the first one we call the director. And when you're in the director mode, you've got a pretty clear idea what it is that you want to do, have done, and how and when it needs to be done. And you're pretty comfortable telling somebody what that is. So what you're doing is you're providing goals for them, you're giving them direction, you're giving them structure. The example I typically use is, think of a director in a play. And even if they're working with a seasoned veteran actor, the instructions they might give that actor in this particular situation are, I want you to move from center stage, take 7 steps forward, turn slightly toward the audience, begin kind of quietly and humbly, and as you deliver your lines, become stronger and more eloquent, right? So what they're doing is providing a lot of direction, structure to help this person deliver what the director feels needs to be delivered in this situation. The director. The tutor. What I have people think of in this case is, imagine you have a child that's struggling in math, okay? And so you hire a tutor. That tutor is not necessarily so concerned with getting the right answer today. What the tutor really focuses on is, do you understand how we got that? Do you understand the process that we go through to get these answers? So what the tutor is going to do is strive to explain things, strive to make sure that you understand what's going on in the situation, right? So that is your tutor. Then next comes the collaborator. And the collaborator sees themselves, what they'll say is like, we're all part of the same team. I mean, my title is boss, okay? But we all work together. I kind of see my role as providing support, facilitating, problem solving. I'm going to encourage you to do the very best that you can. Okay? It's almost seen as equal roles. The example I use in this one, it's a film called Silence of the Lambs. And in it, we've got John Demme, who is director. We've got Anthony Hopkins, who was the star, the male star in the show. And he was Hannibal Lecter. And what these 2 professionals did was, every time Hannibal Lecter was on the screen, okay, they would get together and say, how would Lecter have done this? And they would overlap each other's roles. In other words, Anthony Hopkins would say, I think this should be a close-up, and the lighting might look like this. And Demme might say, and I think he's going to like start the scene more low-key and subtle and quiet. And they would talk about each and every scene about Hannibal Lecter and do it together. And the reason why I like this so much is both of them won Academy Awards for their performance doing this together, collaborating. Next is casual. The casual approach is I'm going to give you my observations, but my whole idea is I want to empower you to do the very best you can. Right? Is I'm not here to be telling you a lot about what to do because I think you know what to do. And once again, my example of this is a movie, an older movie. Some of you may not have seen. It's called Animal House. And in the movie Animal House, the star was John Belushi, and the director was John Landis. And there is a scene in this movie called The Food Fight, where John Belushi goes through a cafeteria line in a college campus. And before the scene is over, there's a general food fight in the cafeteria. What Landis tells him is he says, you have done more improv than all the rest of us on this movie set combined. And if you remember, Belushi began his career in Chicago doing improv. Then he went to Saturday Night Live, right? He had all of this experience. And what Landis told him was, I want you to use that experience, okay? I encourage you to be creative. You've got 2.5 minutes. This scene is leading to this scene over here. Go do it. And they filmed it in one take, right? Because what Landis basically did was empower Belushi to do the very best he could with almost no direction whatsoever. So what I do is I tell people there's basically 4 styles out there. Almost all of us, okay, are going to have a strong preference toward 1 or 2 of these. The problem is we overdo it. We will tend to use that 1 or 2 styles more frequently than we need to. And when it works wonderfully, right? If your natural style is director and you're giving instructions and direction, okay, and now people need that, they feel good. But if they don't feel that they need it, they feel like you're demanding, controlling, okay, micromanaging. It just doesn't feel good. Okay? And the same for the tutor. If all that explanation and help feels good and is helping you understand math and solve the next problem correctly, okay, you used exactly the right style. But if that is not the style people were looking for, it sounds like you're preaching, overwhelming people with information. They don't like it. The same with collaboration. When collaboration works, people feel great. But if it's not what they were looking for, they feel like you're patronizing them. You're just complicating the situation. Why can't you just tell me what you want me to do? And lastly, casual. When it works as well as it did in the movie that we talked about. When it doesn't work, you've got direct reports feeling like you're avoiding leadership, okay, and just dumping work on them rather than doing your job as a leader. So the whole key in this is for leaders to figure out what is probably my natural style, and when it doesn't work, what are my opportunities to maybe lean toward one of these others? Does that make some sense?
Such a great framework. I love it. Leaders should also assess their team's needs, individual personalities, and challenges that they face as well to align their coaching style appropriately. My next question really is around now we've identified that every leader has a dominant style, but they may need to adapt to different situations. How do you recommend leaders balance the benefits of each style while avoiding the potential downsides? So you gave us the benefits, you gave us some of the downsides. Speak to us more about that balancing act and how they can better balance those different styles.
Let me make it easy for you. Exactly the same thing I tell the people I'm coaching. Don't make this too difficult. The main thing you want to look at is what is their competence level? What is their ability to do what you have in front of you right now? And if they're pretty competent, okay, and if they're pretty skilled, you're probably going to be a collaborator or you're going to be more casual because they don't need a lot of instruction to do this. So are you going to be more of a team player with them? Or are you going to really empower them to do the best that they can? Because they got the skills, they got the abilities. If you sense in some way they don't have the requisite skills or abilities to do this particular task today, you're probably going to lean more toward the director or the tutor, which leads you to say, do you think they need a lot of instruction or do they need a little instruction to do this?
Now, you've highlighted breaking a job into 3 to 5 components that can make coaching more targeted and effective. Could you share an example of how this approach has worked in practice?
I use it almost in every practical coaching situation that I have. And in fact, for one of our books, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, we interviewed over 100 executives and said, what do you think you do well? What do you think you do less well? And by resounding amount, they say, I know I should spend more time with that people. I know I should coach them more, okay, and spend more time doing this, but there just aren't enough hours in the day. So what do you do when there aren't enough hours in the day, but your people need development, they need coaching, they need help on the job? And I said, a great way to start is that every job, whether you're CEO of the organization or your school crossing guard, can be broken down into 3 to 5 components. There's no exceptions to that rule. So for instance, if you're CEO of an organization, we're not talking big picture here. What might that CEO be responsible for? Well, maybe one is the performance of the organization, the overall performance. Now that can be broken down into quality and profitability, but one of your key responsibilities is the overall performance of that organization. Maybe another responsibility is you need to plan for the future. What's the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years look like for that organization? Another responsibility is managing Wall Street. What does the stock market think of your organization? What do customers think? Maybe another responsibility is coaching and developing senior leaders on your team, okay? So that you've got the bench strength for the organization to continue. But every leader can take this approach to looking at what are their key responsibilities. So what I tell leaders to do is, first of all, do this for your job. You'll love it. It'll be fun. But secondly, before you ever begin coaching with your people, ask them to do that for their job. What are the 3 to 5 key responsibilities of their job? Okay. Then what you ask them is, for next year, you know what your key responsibilities are. You know what your obligations are. You know what your targets are for next year. For next year, which of these 3 to 5 key responsibilities do you think will be the most important to you for achieving success? And then once you agree on that, and by the way, that may be a rich conversation right there, okay, is do we all agree on what are your key responsibilities? But once we agree on what those are, then the leader has the opportunity to say, which one of these do you feel really confident and able to tackle? And are there any of these I might be able to help you with? Okay? And that way you are targeting your coaching on those areas that'll make the most difference for the organization and for the person next year. And that's why I love starting coaching with identify the key areas of responsibility that you have.
When targeting 1 to 2 high impact areas enables precise coaching and avoids that overwhelm that a lot of employees feel when you just give them that broad, generic feedback.
Absolutely. And in fact, it's like giving employees, 12 key responsibilities they're responsible for next year without prioritizing them. So when the employee says, well, which ones of these are most important? And they hear back, they're all important. Okay? And what I tell leaders is what the employee just heard is none of them are important.
Well, now, coaching always isn't smooth sailing. So, in your experience, what are some common mistakes leaders make when coaching employees who run into trouble?
Charles, I'd say the most common mistake that leaders make when their employees run into trouble is they try and do the job themselves for the employee. And they'll have all kinds of excuses for that. Like, it's just easier if I do it myself. Okay. Or this one's really critical. It's highly visible. It needs to be done right. I'll just do it myself. So first of all, what I'll say is there's times where they're absolutely right. Okay. There are times where maybe you can jump in, do it yourself, and tackle this whole coaching leadership thing at a later time. But that's not your go-to strategy. So the first thing when people have run into trouble is ask yourself, well, have they really run into trouble? What kind of behaviors am I looking for from this person to determine have they really run into trouble, or is it something different? And when people have run into trouble, typically what you're going to see is they'll be frustrated. If people on your team are frustrated on the job, doing something specific, you can almost count on they've kind of run into some trouble. And so what do they need? They need to get re-energized. They've lost their mojo when they've run into trouble. They're frustrated, they're overwhelmed, they may be discouraged, and what they need is to get re-energized. And the way that the leader does that is, first of all, you got to give them perspective. There's a very good chance right now they feel like everything is going wrong. And the truth of the matter is everything's probably not going wrong. So you help them identify and analyze what are the successes and where are the problems that we need to fix. And then you give them information and advice. Okay. Now, if you know what the answers are, if you've done this yourself, don't play games with them. Okay. Say, okay, I understand what your problem is. Here are some things that you might try, and help them put together a game plan for success for the future. That's the best way to help people who have run into trouble. Got one more thought here, though. The time is going to come where your people have run into trouble. And you know what? You don't know the devil what to do either. You don't have an answer for them either. So what do you do when your people have run into trouble and you're not sure what track to take either? I have a wonderful tool I know that we're going to talk about later called Feed Forward. Okay? That's going to be a very valuable tool for handling this as well.
Pitfalls as well, Bill, are just focusing on failures. This, if you focus on failure, right, it demoralizes employees. Instead, try to provide that validation and feedback on progress. And then the other common thing, Bill, I see is that a lot of leaders overload them with advice. Bombarding employees with solutions can quickly and easily overwhelm them. Well, you also talk about coaching for engagement, particularly for those facing burnout. What strategies have you found most effective for re-engaging seasoned employees who feel demotivated or overwhelmed?
Yeah, this happens a lot, especially in companies that have been around for a while and have employees that have been around for decades. And I'll really start with what's the most likely response when a seasoned employee, okay, who's probably doing a pretty good job at this, walks in and says, I can do it. I can do it in my sleep. I don't want to do it. And you've got a boss there who's got a heaping full plate, right? Who's got an employee sitting in front of them saying, I can do it, but I don't want to do it. Why do I have to do it? Too many times what the boss says is, you know why you have to do it? It's part of your job. Go do it, which to say the least is not effective. It is demoralizing for the person to hear. So what is the most effective style for using this? It's back to our 4 styles of leadership. It's collaborative. This person knows how to do the job. Okay, so they don't have a skill problem, but they're burned out. And keep in mind, too many times what people say is those bad people get burned out on the job. You know what I say to that? Very rarely. You know who gets burned out on the job? Good people. Because you know what the reward in a lot of organizations is for doing a particularly distasteful task well?
More of it.
You get more of it, and you get to do more and more and more until finally that person says, can't somebody else do this? Can't I get a little bit of help? And the most effective leadership strategy here is to problem solve with that person. Okay. The best example I ever heard of this was I was coaching a woman at Bell South back when that was the telephone company for the 11 southeastern states. And as part of Bell South's values was community involvement, community service. Because of that, they had a very strong commitment to the United Way. And the woman I was coaching had been in charge of the United Way campaign for the state of Georgia for 10 years. And as I talked to her, she said, the first 2 or 3 or 4 years I did this, I found it so rewarding. I felt like I was adding value to the community. I got invited to the governor's mansion for a ball. She goes, I just loved it. But she goes, we do this on top of our regular job at Bell South. And after about 10 years, she just goes into her boss and says, I've done this for 10 years. Let somebody else do it next year. So I talked to the boss, and the boss says, you have no idea how important this is to our company. Part of my performance review is how well did we do on the United Way campaign? And he goes, she does such a marvelous job of it. I have no bench strength. I have nobody that can take over that job. What am I going to do? And what this boss did was, back to our 3 to 5 components. The boss said, let's kind of break this job, okay, of managing all of the donations, okay? What parts of this, are there any parts of this that you don't mind so much or maybe even enjoy? And what she did was kind of break it down and said, well, I don't so much mind this. Of course, I love going to the ball at the governor's mansion, but I hate doing this and this. And what he said is, if I could get not one, but 2 people to help you in the things that you really don't like doing, you get to retain doing the things that you do. And in the process, they learn how to do your job so that next year they can take over your job. Okay? Could you do this year, okay, with excitement? And she goes, absolutely. Okay. It's kind of her last chance to do the job and do it well one more year. So the answer is, what you try and do is problem solve with these people. What can they do? What can you do to help them and involve them in the process?
But I think you mentioned a few critical things that I really want to highlight here is one, the boss listened deeply,
Yes.
created opportunities for them to express their concerns. He showed value by highlighting how their work impacts his job, his bonuses, and the organization as a whole, and provided relief, offer support, reduce workload, involve them more into their stimulating tasks that they're excited about, which is common sense, right? But a lot of times common sense isn't common practice. And these tips work really effectively, well, if used on a frequent basis.
Common sense is in common practice. What this bus did was get everybody motivated and engaged.
Now, Bill, coaching and mentoring, they often overlap, but you emphasize that they serve different purposes. How should leaders differentiate between these two approaches when guiding their teams?
Great question, because they're really very different things. Coaching almost invariably involves the boss. The boss is coaching some people or a person on the team, okay, to improve their performance in their current job, right? And so it involves the boss and it involves improving your performance at your current job to do something. Mentors are almost never the boss. A mentor in an organization is typically someone more senior in the organization and somebody who's not in your line of chain of command. So, for instance, if you're in marketing, your mentor should be in finance or should be in operations, but not in marketing. And people say, why not? And I say, because if this person is more senior than you, okay, and you start developing a close personal relationship, okay, it can look inappropriate. It can look political, and that's not what your mission is. So the mentor should be somebody higher in the organization, but not in your chain of command. And what that mentor is concerned about is not your performance on the job today. What that mentor is concerned with developing you for the future. That mentor is going to have conversations with you that sound like, Charles, so much of the work you're doing today is tactical. We need to get you thinking more strategic, working on more strategic issues. Okay, Charles, there's politics in every organization, even ours. Let's talk about that and how you can leverage that to your advantage. Okay? And so they're looking over the horizon to developing you for the future. What I tell people who are really ambitious is you should have not one, but 2 mentors. The first mentor is what I described, somebody in the organization. And some people work in an organization that has a sophisticated process to identify mentors and mentees. If you work in an organization that doesn't, I always suggest people you recruit your own mentor. Let me tell you how not to recruit your mentor. And that's going to someone and saying, would you be my mentor? Right? And that senior person in the organization is likely very busy and also is going to be sitting there thinking, I'm not even sure how to mentor. I don't have the time. I don't know how I would do this. And they'll probably make some excuse not to work with you. Let me give you a tip. The way to recruit a mentor is to identify something about that person who you'd like to be your mentor that they do well. Maybe they have great financial acumen, even though they're not working in the financial arena. Maybe they build effective teams. Whatever it is that person does, Go and tell them, say, I really respect how you do X. I would love to buy you a cup of coffee and talk about that sometime. Would you be willing to do that? And if you approach it that way, I can almost guarantee you the person will say yes, and they'll probably pay for the coffee. And then what you do is you start developing a relationship with that person, and then can ask them to be a mentor. Develop your own mentor. The second mentor, okay, I think should be someone very much like you. And the reason why I say this, and this is especially true if you're not a white male in the organization, if you're a single parent in the organization, if you're a person of color in the organization, right? You have some special issues that maybe other people in the organization don't have. Find a mentor that is very much like you. I'll give you a personal example. I grew up and my dad was an airline mechanic and my mother was a secretary, back when you called them secretaries, in a company that made chili and tamales, okay? And just let me tell you that the dinner table in my house, we didn't sit around talking about niceties and we didn't sit around talking about business. So after I get my MBA, I go to work for Johnson & Johnson, one of the most conservative companies you can imagine, right? And I end up at these round table dinners with a bunch of executives seated next to a vice president. I can't begin to tell you how uncomfortable I felt in that situation. My past background did not prepare me for talking to these people. And I'd find myself at the end of that dinner sometimes saying, Bill, why would you say something like that to a vice president? How stupid was that? But I just was totally unprepared for that environment. How valuable would it have been for me to have had a second mentor, say somebody who would come to me and say, Bill, you want to know something? My dad worked in the coal mine and my mother never finished high school. I'm now vice president of a bank. Get over here, boy, let's talk. That would have been very valuable to me to talk to somebody who had had my life experiences, okay, and could mentor me through that situation. So coaching and mentoring, coaching is meant for improving your performance on the job, typically by a boss. Mentors, two are better than one, and they're preparing you for the future.
Is there any advice around if it's valuable to have them in different industries? I mean, they need to have a certain level of experience, right? So they're farther along the path than you are, but maybe not necessarily being in the same company or in the same industry is necessary because they can still offer you some valuable advice. And most importantly, you want to make sure that they can spend the time to nurture that, right? Because like you say, a lot of senior leaders are just too busy and they might be a good mentor, but if they don't have the time to devote to it, it's not going to be a very fulfilling experience for you.
Absolutely. Somebody who is in a different company, a different industry can be just as valuable to you as somebody inside your organization. In fact, usually what the key element is to a mentor is chemistry. It's that chemistry between the mentor and the mentee, that the mentor wants to help this person and the mentee trusts the mentor to give them good advice.
I hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights. If it has, I ask you to share it with someone who would also benefit from it. If you've been enjoying and gaining knowledge from this podcast, then subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find all the previous episodes of the podcast and additional learning resources. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify and leave up to a 5-star review.